Chapter 76. An oval pill of light shimmered above her, and Ray kicked out for it, casting her hands through the dark water and sweeping herself upwards. Hands clasped over her, she pierced through the light and her head broke water. Gasping, Ray grabbed at the edge of what appeared to be the toilet she'd just emerged from, and hauled herself up and out, her wedding dress soaked and making the job that much more difficult. In a wet bundle on the floor, panting and appalled at the excremental nature of her entrance, Ray looked around at the lavatory. It was absolutely gorgeous. The word sumptuous came to her mind for perhaps the first time in her life. Spacious and airy, discreet light emanated from unseen sources. The white marble walls and floor were veined with a rich grey. Beside her, chevroned tiles marked out a feature wall behind a gold-framed mirror, below which an oblong granite boulder stood at waist height, with a smooth sink carved into it. The toilet itself was a work of art. Slate panels extended from the wall to hold the bowl in blunted grey angles like it had formed from elemental magma millennia ago, the joints in the rock backlit by a dim golden glow. With a splash, a hand thrust up out of the toilet and grasped the rim, its cloven thumb slipping and clawing at the wet surface. Fighting her dress, Ray slopped her way onto her feet, grabbed his hand and helped haul Mr. Thumb out. A few tugs, and he too was delivered onto the floor. They gathered themselves and stood before the gilded mirror. Him, still in his crimson suit, wet through now and darkened, lapels crumpled, tie in disarray, buttons missing from his shirt and feet squelching in his sodden dress shoes. She, the drowned bride, her white dress sticking to her in veiled peach where it clung to her skin, the saggy hang of the material hopeless, mascara streaming down her cheeks and her hair plastered to her face in wet whips. "Some honeymoon," said Ray, without blinking. The man with the cloven thumb looked over his shoulder. "Well, it's a throne of sorts. Think of it more as a coronation." "Dare I ask," she said to the mirror, "where we are now?" "We're in the John at the green room," he said. She frowned at his image. "Backstage at the venue." He adjusted his tie and raised an irresistible eyebrow at his reflection. "VIPs only, of course. The sim, Ray, you got through. You're in." So it set the simulation in a concert? "Yep. A big concert hall. There's a gig on, and it's all gone to shit. I hope you brought your thinking cap. I'll bug it if I know what to do." Ray looked behind as they sloshed out of the restroom together. Bit plush for a backstage toilet, isn't it? "Yeah." Mr. Thumb led her along a series of corridors towards the clamour of the unsettled crowd. "There's something a bit funky with the way this place is being run." Following the corridors, the man with the cloven thumb got Ray up to speed with events in the metastasis sim. Ray nodded in agreement as they paced along together. "You're right. There's something odd about the venue management and how they're dealing with shit here. Booking a support band that lip-syncs. You couldn't ask for a more controlled performance. And their attempts to manipulate the songs the headliners play. And the heavy-handed security. Yeah, this is a textbook power struggle. Aspects of the cluster trying to dominate the rest of the group." "You're thinking Pascal and Yolanta," Mr. Thumb said. "Clearly their influence, yes. Amongst perhaps other members of the board." Ray shrugged. There must be all sorts going on, but I'd say that's why we were sent here. Mr. Thumb followed her train of thought. So, if we can get a consensus at this gig and get everyone to conform to the dictates of the venue's management, then the board will fall in line with Jolanta and Pascal and their plans for this viral outbreak. He nodded, a slight frown plucking his brow. You said most of the crowd were passive, just one small gang challenging anything, Ray asked. Uh-huh. And the band are falling to pieces? You got it. The pair came to a heavy door with authorised personnel only, written on it, and stopped. The complaints of the irate crowd were particularly loud here. The stage must be on the other side. Ray and the man with the cloven thumb looked at each other. We can work this. They're pliable, Ray stated, flat and pragmatic. Shouldn't be a problem getting them to toe the line and play how the venue wants. I've had tougher assignments. Ray put a hand on the door handle to open it, then paused. The man with the cloven thumb knew what she was going to say next. He loved her so much. Thing is, she continued, I have a much, much better idea. Soon after, the man with the cloven thumb strutted on stage. He seemed to have grown a few inches taller and a few inches broader. He closed his eyes for a moment as the stage lights threw their beams upon him. He just knew how well they caught his features, how dramatically the light and shadows carved up his face. In one movement, he swept the enraged drummer off Sickening Jimmy and sent him back to his drum kit with a command in his eye and sorcery in his pointed finger. A few people in the crowd cheered him on. Mr. Thumb stooped down to check on the front man, who was utterly out of it, eyes rolling from the mixture of drink, drugs, and a beating from his bandmate. Amongst the jagged tattoos on the singer's neck, Mr. Thumb found 2 black dots on either side of his Adam's apple, omnidirectional dermamics. He pulled them off and placed them on his own throat, then swaggered to the front of the stage to strike a pose, all hips and elbows, with a flourish of something triumphant in his eyes. He raised his arms wide, ruler of the stage, and, at least for this brief moment, occupant of the hall's attention. The man with the cloven thumb took a deep breath and opened his mouth. Oh! He lay out an operatic ululation over the PA, a stream of pure confidence clipped short at the end with a sweep of his arm. He held a cupped hand to his ear and served his challenge to the crowd. The fury of the room died down, the brew of discontent settling until only a few complaining voices could be heard clattering away. Everyone gawped at this curious man in the dripping wet suit as he paraded over to the other side of the stage and tried again. "Eh-oh." Even louder this time, more compelling. He cupped a hand behind his ear once again and conducted the crowd with a decisive gesture. "Eh-oh," came the response. Not from everyone, by any means, but a reasonable number followed along. Mr. Thumb didn't hesitate, barely giving them a chance to finish their call. "Eh-oh, deo, deo, deo." Controlled, rapid fire, a descending scale. "Eh-oh, deo, deo, deo." The response swelled and more joined in as their apprehension evaporated. "Eh-oh." He pitched a quick one, higher, a dare. "Eh-oh." The audience followed. "Eh-oh." Even higher. Could they do it? Hey-oh! They were right with him. The man with the cloven thumb took a breath and opened himself up, letting loose an even higher, even louder call in a crescendo that vibrated in every corner. Hey-oh! And the entire room did their best. Liberated from all modesty, they called out as one. This was fun. Da-do-dee-do-da-do-dee-do-da-do-dee-do. Now he could play with them. He finished his call with an exaggerated twirl and an upswing of a hand to cue his people on the beat. Dee-do-da-do-dee-do-da-do-dee-do. They were his. Dee-do, dee-do, all his. Oh, right! He beamed his approval. Oh, right! Came the immediate answer of several thousand voices. The man with the cloven thumb hoped Ray was making progress out there somewhere. This was going well, but he couldn't keep it up forever. Down in the stalls, Ray rummaged through the horde of people as the man with the cloven thumb set forth on his call and response improvisation. Through the forest of shoulders and heads, she thought she found who she'd been looking for. They certainly looked how he described them. A group of kids, scraggy and malnourished, pupils like frying pans from whatever they were on, sweating, bleeding, a threatening presence that bystanders were trying to keep at bay. Ray barged into their midst. "Oi, you lot! Someone's giving Richie Fernandez a kicking!" She didn't give them time to react, just turned and powered back off through the crowd. The gang might have been mashed up, but Richie Fernandez was the guitarist in their favourite band, and they'd already seen him get hauled off by security down at the front. With the scent of action in the air, the lopsided pack bowled off after her. Leading them towards the back, where the crowd was thinner, Ray stopped and looked frantically around. The gang caught up and joined in the search, scanning about for any sign of their beloved guitar hero. They were right here. Fuck! Ray shouted, eyes springing with frustrated tears. An award-winning performance. Pacing about and desperate, she jabbed a hand at the floor. Right here, I'm telling you. Richie fucking Fernandez getting the tar kicked out of him. He was on the floor. There was a bunch of guards and one particular cunt. Ray stopped and stared, pointing at the man in the nearby mixing booth. Him! He was the fucking worst. Split Richie's lip open, the cunt. The technician, ensconced in the booth, was just visible. You could see his head through the perspex plexiglass that mounted the low walls of the cubicle. Fortunately for Ray, he was a smug-looking bastard whose smarmy grin was just asking to get filled in. Not that it mattered. In the state they were in, this pack of hooligans would have set upon just about anybody, given the chance. In a rush of gangly limbs, the unwashed agitators smashed through the door and flooded into the mixing booth. The sound engineer opened his mouth to protest, but found a hail of fists and foreheads pounding him to the floor, where the stomping really put him out of action. Good effort, Ray nodded admiringly, closing the door behind her. I've been touring with the ropes all year, and don't ask me why, but this venue is a proper nightmare. They've got some beef with the band, I don't know what. Money, probably. But it's got out of hand. You've seen what I mean. A few ringleaders in the posse puffed themselves up and gave a dignified nod. Ray took a step forward and got up in their faces. You cannot let anyone in this booth, she hissed at them through gritted teeth. You got me? Nobody. We're going to pull this gig back from the brink, and if anyone from the venue tries to interfere... She peered down at the unconscious form of the sound engineer, and the wired bunch of rejects nodded in understanding. Don't let me down, she said, and swept out of their company as quickly as she'd swept in. dee-da-dee-da-dee-da-dee-da-dee-oh. The pale jellyfish of Ray's dress came drifting towards the stage and caught the man with the cloven thumb's eye. The crowd was still revelling in his singing lessons. He hopped down and helped her over the railings and up onto the stage with him. Upon seeing Mr. Thumb pluck a bride seemingly at random from amongst them, the crowd cheered their novel new idol on. Fascinated. Right, he leaned into Ray, muting his throat mic. What next, Chief? Know any good songs? None that come to mind, she said with a wicked glint. Give us the mic. It's time to improvise. Mr. Thumb took the derma mics off and placed them on her with his forefinger and thumb. Lady, you're live. Make it count. Looking out at the many faces of the watchful crowd, Ray made her way to the edge of the stage. En route, she picked up a guitar-shaped keyboard from an array of instruments, a lightweight synthesizer supported by a strap around the neck and shoulders. An expectant hush fell upon the room as Ray sat down, her feet dangling off the edge of the stage. With the guitar on her lap, she picked out a white note at random and played it with a single finger 3 times. Then a nearby black note a few times, its neighbour 3 times. She took a risk and played another white note further down. It sounded good, so she played the black one next to it too, before going back to the start again. It was an uncomplicated melody, little more than a line from a nursery rhyme, but revamped as it was by the guitar effects and amplified around the hall by the PA, it had a haunting quality to it. Ray repeated it, again and again, until her forefinger knew the simple pattern. Then she closed her eyes and spoke. Say thanks for your life, thanks for your job, thanks for your wife, or the man, or this mob. Say thanks to your boss, and his boss, and his boss. Thanks for the mass car, thanks for your loan. Say thanks for those online amusements at home. Say thanks for your lunch breaks, thanks for the ad breaks, thanks for the mistakes, the bad faith, the heartaches, thanks to the beige slop you're sold at the shop. And let's not forget to say thanks to the clock that says start and the clock that says stop, and you just say thanks till you're ready to drop. Say thanks for the synth meet, thanks for your tribe, who all thank you back by clicking like and subscribe. Say thanks for the choice you've got, thanks for the grind, and thanks to the elders we've all left behind. Her single finger still plugging away artlessly on her synth, Ray clenched her teeth and waited for the next words to arise. There was an anger in her, barking in her body, straining at its leash. As if on cue, the bass drum started pounding from the monitors, keeping time with her tune, a double beat like a pulse. The rope service drummer didn't know this mascara-streaked bride, didn't know where this was going, but he knew the pull of performance when he saw it. He knew how to build tension, and he knew how to drive momentum into the heart of a crowd. It came to her, and Ray opened her eyes, glowering over the heads of the audience, the intent of a soldier preparing to charge, her resolve absolute. It started as a whisper. They use force to make you do what the deciders have decided you must do. She said it again, a little louder. They use force to make you do what the deciders have decided you must do." Ray stood up and snarled into the lights. Her breath caught her voice, and the phrase found its footing. "They use force to make you do what the deciders have decided you must do." Mr. Thumb beat out the rhythm in claps and stomps, whipping the crowd up to join the beat. The trundle of 1,000 stamping feet alternated with the snap of 1,000 hands clapping. The crowd took up the call. "They use force to make you do what the deciders have decided you must do." Suffering from a cut over his eye and a steaming foul mood, Richie Fernandez limped onto the stage and selected a guitar. A cheer rose at his reappearance. The guitarist scowled at the crowd and stuck a middle finger up at them, before strapping his guitar on and plugging it in. "They use force to make you do what the deciders have decided you must do." The chant gathered strength, a field of fists punching the air on the beat. Richie Fernandez nodded, impressed, and looked around for his old mate, the co-founder of the band, Sickening Jimmy. He found him at the side of the stage, slumped on an amp with his head in his hands, swaying unsteadily as though he might puke up. Richie knelt next to him, cupped the back of his head, and held him close. Nobody heard what he said into Jimmy's ear, but when the guitarist stood up and held out his hand, the front man grabbed it and yanked himself up. The room went wild. "They use force to make you do what the deciders have decided you must do." By this time, Mr. Thumb was pogoing around, bouncing to the beat, along with a good 500 bodies mimicking him in front of the stage. Ray stood stock still in the centre, chanting her anthem with cool hatred. A ghostly bride lost in a trance, bewitching the masses before her. "They use force to make you do what the deciders have decided you must do." The chant rose as Sickening Jimmy jammed the lead on his bass guitar home and joined his guitarist at the front of the stage. Awestruck by the congregation before them, the two began clapping and pumping the air too, and just when they thought the army of fans couldn't possibly get any louder, it went through the roof. "They use force to make you do what the deciders have decided you must do." The moment was ripe and ready to pluck. With a glance back at the drums and a nod of mutual understanding, the rope service turned up the volume on their instruments and ripped into their heaviest number. A thrashing, erratic anthem that the crowd knew well and adored. Every riff, every change, every word. And every inch of the hall, every muscle in the room went into a fit. A sea of heads and hair boiling in bacchanalian release. By the first chorus, streams of crowd surfers were riding the waves of 1,000 uplifted arms, raised high in jubilation and the unbridled joy of connection. The man with the cloven thumb and Ray caught each other's eye, each raising a hand in the sign of the horns. The security beasts had lost any hope of controlling anyone, sensibly choosing not to provoke this horde of maniacs any further. People at the front started climbing over the barriers as crowd surfers rained down upon the guards, feet first. While the ropes rocked out, Ray and Mr. Thumb bent down and pulled fans onto the stage to mosh with their idols. Richie Fernandez took a stage dive, soloing as he was passed over people's heads, his face lit with rapture, as Sickening Jimmy looked on with tears in his eyes and gratitude in his heart. The song ripped along and built to its famous finale. The drums thudded the number out, and the band fell about in sweaty glee to the outrageous yells and applause of the room. Ray and Mr. Thumb waved to the fans at the front before strutting off the stage 10 feet tall. Shit, that went better than I thought. Ray was breathless and buzzing. You fucking nailed it. The man with the cloven thumb hauled her into a rough embrace. Oh, if this hasn't worked, Ray brought up the display on her eyeline to tap out of the simulation. Then the board will fucking murder us. Are you kidding me? Mr. Thumb looked back to the stage. Can't you hear that? Behind them, the concert hall had roused itself once again, a livid choir lifting the roof in defiance. They use force to make you do what the deciders have decided you must do. He had a point.